No i bardzo dobrze, proszę Państwa, że nie próbowaliśmy liczyć tym razem tego czasu, bo te 120 sekund potrwałoby tym razem wyjątkowo długo. Bardzo się cieszę, bo właściwie mam takie wrażenie, że o ile sala była podczas pierwszego dania tej intelektualnej uczty dzisiaj zapełniona w 99%, to w tej chwili jest w 100%, a być może nawet za chwilę zacznie brakować miejsc, co mnie, umówmy się, kompletnie nie dziwi. Bardzo się cieszę, że tu jesteście. Bardzo się cieszę, że jesteście gotowi smakować to, co za chwilę będą opowiadali. Jeśli pozwolicie, przedstawię najpierw sylwetkę jednego, potem drugiego głównego bohatera tej części naszego spotkania. Michał Brański, proszę Państwa, to współtwórca poczty i portalu o2.pl. Odpowiada za rozwój głównych marek i serwisów grupy WP. W holdingu Wirtualnej Polski jest człowiekiem od strategii. Interesuje go przyszłość. Pozwolę sobie nazwać go wizjonerem. Jest aktywnym uczestnikiem debat dotyczących rozwoju technologii w Polsce i ich wpływu na otoczenie, co za chwilę ponownie udowodni. Zapraszam na scenę Michał Brański, wiceprezes Wirtualnej Polski. Brawa! Witam serdecznie. Bardzo proszę. No i to jest ten moment, proszę Państwa. On sam uchodzi za mistrza syntezy. Spróbuję zatem krótko przedstawić jego sylwetkę. 2 godziny każdej doby medytuje, kierując się zasadą nie rób nic, po prostu obserwuj rzeczywistość. Rzeczywistość obecnej chwili, czymkolwiek jest. To być może te właśnie chwile cichej i uważnej obserwacji pozwalają mu spojrzeć na rzeczywistość z typowej dla niego perspektywy szerokiej jak horyzont. Jego myśl jest odważna i błyskotliwa, a styl charakteryzuje rozmach i erudycja. Choć jest profesorem na Wydziale Historii Uniwersytetu Hebrajskiego, równie porywająco jak o czasach minionych potrafi opowiadać o przyszłości. Jego książki Sapiens, od zwierząt do bogów, Homo Deus, Krótka historia jutra oraz 21 lekcji na XXI wiek to międzynarodowe bestsellery, przetłumaczone na 65 języków. Jak dotąd sprzedano ich 40 milionów egzemplarzy. Spotkałem się z taką sugestią, że dla jego książek można by przygotować w księgarniach półki z zupełnie nową kategorią – przygoda intelektualna. Niewątpliwie za chwilę jedna z takich przygód stanie się naszym udziałem. Please welcome on stage Profesor Yuval Noah Harari. Wielkie brawa.
Hi, Professor. Hi, dear esteemed guests. Not to lose any of your precious time. As an introduction, I will try to ask the questions that are meant to elicit strong reactions, either from the audience or from the professor. I won't touch on Ukraine. I'd like to put that subject on a side because I'm feeling the airspace is already oversaturated with opinions on evolution of the conflict in Ukraine. Maybe it will make the interview less newsworthy, but you are one of the few people, and I'm the avid reader of your works, that I'd like to pick the brain of and peek behind the hill or peek around the corner. What's next in the cards? My first question is, for me, it's a pressing issue, and I would like to know if the change is long overdue. Shorter work week. California is debating and will be voting on the legislation for making the work week 32-hour long. France has already 35 and is debating whether to shorten it to 32. I would go even for shorter work week. What's your take on it, given automation, threats to jobs and such?
I think that it's almost impossible to make predictions about the job market because it's changing much faster than in any previous time in history. It's really the first time in history we have no idea how the job market would look like in 20 years. And also it's very, very likely that we'll not have just a single job market all over the world. There'll be huge differences, bigger than ever before, because automation will destroy a lot of jobs while creating a lot of completely new jobs that we cannot even imagine. You know, if you went back 20 or 30 years and you told people today that there are jobs, that you told people then that today we have jobs like a blogger or a YouTuber or an influencer, and these are very prestigious jobs. I mean, what is it even? So part of the problem we face is that there might be extreme inequalities, that some people have no skills that are required by the job market, whereas others are extremely necessary, and maybe they are encouraged or have to work even more than they do today. And the differences could also be, you know, between entire regions in the world, with some countries becoming extremely powerful and rich because of the new economy, and actually have a much higher demand for jobs and for workforce, whereas other countries completely collapse.
And don't we deserve? It's what our forefathers fought for, shorter work week. The 40-hour work week was introduced in US in 1940. In Poland, it was introduced in 2003.
Well, ideally, you know, ideally...
Why we stick with 40? Who subscribes to the idea that the work week should be much shorter, radically shorter, like 1/3 shorter? Who in the audience? Yeah, I would.
A lot of people. I mean, I think it depends on how you define work, or how you find a work week. I mean,
work that requires me to sit in that position, unhealthy position, behind my desk.
Then maybe zero. I mean, there are two different reasons that people work. They work in order to get what they need for subsistence. Food, clothing, shelter, whatever. And then they work to gain meaning. A lot of people gain meaning from work. Now, the first reason, in a kind of utopian society of the future, maybe you don't need to work at all, 0 hours of work. If you have the tools to provide people with what they need, even with what they want without work, a lot of jobs are not worth saving. We need to protect people, not jobs. So from that perspective, if we can reduce it to 0, why not? Then there is the question of finding meaning in life and engaging with what you do. But this is like a question about what do you mean by work? Is raising a family work? Is building a community work? Is observing yourself and getting to know yourself better, is it work? Earlier it was mentioned that I meditate for 2 hours every day. This is extremely hard work. Nobody's paying me to do that. I don't expect anybody to pay me for that. But in terms of how hard it is, it's one of the hardest things I do. So much of the question of the ideal work time for humans simply depends on what we include under the term work.
And still we stick with rigid 40 hours. And still we stick with rigid 40 hours requirement. Do you ever, Professor Harari, do you ever self-censor?
What I think, what I say, what I write?
The origin of the question is, my 2 sons asked me once, Dad, do you hold any convictions, beliefs that you wouldn't share publicly because of the fear of being cancelled, deplatformed? And I said I had 2. I say they were very eager to know what are these. I won't share it. Do you ever self-censor? Do you hold any beliefs that you wouldn't share with us, fearing being cancelled?
Not just fearing being cancelled, it's much deeper than that. I mean, the mind is full of garbage. You shouldn't share everything.
That's not the question, Professor Harari. Do you ever, if you held any beliefs that you think are true, but you won't share it publicly?
Yes. because I think my job as a public intellectual is not just to speak up, it's also to be heard. And to be heard, you need to kind of tailor what you say for the audience. And again, I think there is a huge problem with what you term cancel culture, which is emerging. And I think the biggest issue is with regard to the abolition of private space and private time. That there should be a very big difference between what we say here on the stage, when we should be very mindful of what we say, because as public intellectuals or as political leaders or as public figures, the words coming out of our mouths are like seeds that go into the mind of thousands, maybe millions of people, and we should be very careful what seeds we are sowing. But when you are in private, we should be able to completely relax, to take off your guard. And I sometimes see that politicians are being hounded because of some joke they told in private. Now, as a gay man, if a politician tells a homophobic joke in private, I don't care about it. It's fine with me. As long as they don't do it in a public speech, as long as their policies are tolerant, they should have their private time to tell whatever. Again, it's not a good thing, but as I said, the human mind is full of garbage. You need to be very careful about what you do and what you say in public, but you need time to let go of your guard. And if we don't give, for instance, politicians private time, if anything they say in a private moment can be recorded and then create political scandal or whatever, then what you get in the end is either a Trump or a Putin. Because either you get this kind of authentic politician who always says exactly what he thinks, which is terrible. We don't need authentic politicians. We need responsible politicians who think 10 times before they say something. Or you get this totalitarian dictator who builds this entire wall around him, a propaganda machine, so that nobody can record him in private and spread it. To have a healthy democracy, we need our politicians, we need our authors, we need our public figures to have their private time to say even stupid things.
Okay. I like the answer. Professor Harari, you most certainly remember Steven Pinker's thesis on the decline of violence and war. Mm-hmm. This one aged badly, I'd say, when you take into account Russia's aggressions on Ukraine, Syria, genocide in Syria, Turkey's mixed feelings toward human rights, Serbia's lust for blood, I'd say. Do you ever fear that unfolding events would refute, overthrow some of your theses that your books contain? Have you changed mind on any of the things you described in your books?
Well, there are a couple of different questions here. With regard to Pinker's thesis, I still agree with it myself, even today, even after Ukraine, because I think people often misunderstand Pinker and also misunderstand sometimes what I say on these things. The thesis is not that war has become impossible and completely disappeared from the world.
But decline.
Yes, it's a statistical issue. If you say that the average height of a person is a meter 60 centimeters, and somebody points out, but look, he's 2 meters. Yes, he's 2 meters, but average, it's still 160. So we need, when a broad historical perspective, the early 21st century is still the most peaceful era in human history in comparative terms.
But not compared to the 90s, I think.
Yes, of course, if you take a very short perspective, so 2022 is worse than 2012. But again, if you, Pinker and also me, when I talk about these things, we talk in terms of centuries and thousands of years. Let's say the era after the end of the Cold War, let's include the 1990s in it, and of course you had Rwanda, you had the Congo, you had these things also in the 1990s, is still more peaceful then the 19th century, the Middle Ages, ancient times. And the key point here is not to be complacent. The message is not, that's it, there is no more war, we don't need to do anything anymore. It's just the opposite. There are still wars, still violence, but less than before. And it's important to recognize the improvement, because if you think, and a lot of people think, that wars don't decline, they always stay on the same level. There is always the same level of violence in the world. What this means is that we can't do anything about it. And it also means that people like Putin are not responsible, because it's not them who make war, it's a law of nature. There is a law of nature that wars erupt at a similar level in every era in history. So here we have a war, it's not Putin's fault. When you realize, no, actually, you look at the numbers, you see a relative decline, not complete disappearance, a relative decline in the incidence of war and violence. This should make us more responsible. It means that, look, there isn't a law of nature that maintains the same level of violence all the time. Humans can reduce wars, so we should make even bigger effort to reduce them even further. And I hope that this will be also the spirit when we now look at the terrible war in Ukraine, that this is a man-made war. This is not a natural disaster. And the lesson is we need to build better global institutions. We need to protect universal values and global norms in order to keep the peace. Not to just despair of it and says, that's it, we are living in the jungle, there is nothing we can do about it.
Today, and this influenced my question, today I had an opportunity to discuss with the female from the earlier generation. One issue that divides us. In her opinion, the Earth is overpopulated, so refraining from having a child is a legitimate right choice. In my opinion, I'm pro-natalist. I have 3 children myself, and I think that that contemporary birth rates endanger Western style of life. What's your take on it? Should the younger people refrain from having children, or should we in opposite?
I think it's a completely personal choice. I don't like it when governments or religions or whatever start telling people how many children to have or what.
But if you won't tell it, they will tell themselves.
No, so I have some things to say about it. Wait a minute.
Yes.
So first of all, you know, at the time of the agricultural revolution, there were something like 8 million people on the earth. Now there are 8 billion. We don't have a shortage of people. If it stays 8 billion, if it goes down to 5 billion, it's fine. There are enough humans on Earth. So I'm not afraid that the humankind will disappear, because there are enough people who want to have children. Secondly, it's not a Western phenomena. It's a universal phenomena. The birth rates in East Asia are even lower than in Europe.
Collapsing even faster than the...
I won't say collapsing. They are just lower birth rates. Even in the Muslim world, in countries like Iran, like Morocco, the birth rate is as low as in certain parts of Europe. So it's a universal phenomena. It has universal causes, like the liberation of women, who have more control over their bodies and over how many children they want. It's partly because of the improvement in healthcare. You know, a century ago, about a third of children died before reaching adulthood. So parents, one of the reasons they wanted to have many children is because they knew if you have only 2 kids, maybe none of them would survive. Ultimately, I think there is a very deep philosophical, existential, spiritual issue about why people have children. And there are 2 very common approaches. One approach is that people have children for their own interests and purposes. Like they have their dreams, they have their fantasies, they have the baggage that they accumulated throughout their life. And they want somebody to take this baggage and now you carry it. Like, I have my nation, I have my religion, I have my party, I'm going to die, but somebody needs to keep carrying these things. You do it. So
Touche. Touche.
So that's one option. The other option, and that's again depends on your religious, spiritual views, you are not the one that creates the kid. The kid comes maybe from God, maybe from a previous life, whatever. She or he, they come with their own baggage. It's not your baggage. You have kids because you've chosen to help somebody with their baggage, not to have somebody to dump your baggage on. And that's, I think, the fundamental question. And personally, I can't even say that I chose not to have kids. It never even occurred to me to have kids, really. It's like, I don't know, why don't you have an elephant?
White elephant.
I mean, why don't you have an elephant?
Because it's a burden.
No, did you ever think about having an elephant? I knew that people have kids. I mean, I live in the world. But in a deep sense, it never really occurred to me that if I didn't know that other people have kids, I would never have thought about it myself.
Okay. Professor Harari, right now on a bit lighter note, you don't have to answer. Were you a popular kid with the crowd in your school years?
No.
Yeah. No. And the second question: Do you ever Netflix and chill? Do you live life? Do you live life of an industrious monk that is dedicated to his work, or do you ever chill? What do you do? What do you do?
If you want to be industrious, you also have to chill. I mean, it goes together. If you work yourself to death, you don't accomplish
What
much.
do you do then?
So, first of all, I do watch a lot of series. Netflix, yes, also other HBO, whatever. So
I'm glad to hear.
Yeah. I play with friends a lot. I go hiking. I do all kinds of things.
What was your darkest hour? I mean, the work-wise or...
Work-wise?
I mean, do you ever doubted your work or wanted to change line of work or not? You were always dedicated and straight like an arrow. Because young people doubt themselves.
Yes. With regard to work, I mean, I was extremely lucky, I think, in my life that most of the time I did what I fancied, I did what I liked.
So you are blessed.
Yeah, and I know it's very rare. It's not something that you can recommend to people, oh, you should do like that, because it demands really, it's a privilege. And very often people just don't get this privilege. So I hope that I'm really grateful that it worked for me. And I realize it's not the case. Many people just don't get the opportunity.
Yeah. Right now, the longer question. Imagine you became the president or the prime minister of second-tier, slightly peripheral country with 38 million population, well-educated, ambitious, resilient, with hint of inferiority complex, modernized, but still lagging behind leading countries of the West. You were elected because of the promise of accelerating economic growth, catching up to the first-tier countries, and raising length of life. What would be your first move as prime minister?
I'm a very bad politician. I mean, the really best move should be to resign and give the job to somebody who understands politics.
Not an option.
Not an option. I mean, the first thing I do is I would end the culture war. I know that I imagine...
It's beyond your powers.
Yeah, so you give me a lot of power and then they take it away. I mean, but I think one of the biggest, maybe the biggest problem internally, leaving aside all the global problems of the world, climate change and so forth, for many of the countries in the West, whether it's Poland, whether it's the United States, whether it's France, it's Britain, and I look at them and I think their biggest problem is really, it's not economic, it's the internal culture war, that society is tearing itself apart. I mean, from many perspectives, it's the best time ever. Lots of problems, yes, but economically, socially, in terms of healthcare services, welfare services, it was never better than now. And yes, you see so much anger and bitterness and sometimes hatred. In many countries, people hate their fellow citizens or fear their fellow citizens more than they hate or fear anybody else on the planet.
I promised I won't touch on Ukraine, but to this question, so do you think that the national unity in Ukraine and the support for President Zelensky will dissolve in time, or will they stay united?
Well, I mean, I hope, and I think there are good reasons to believe that they will stay united. It doesn't mean that he will continue to have the same approval rates. Usually, not in times of war, but in normal times, when a leader has phenomenal approval rates, it's usually a very bad sign.
Yeah.
In real democracies, liberal democracies, if you have an approval rate of 50%, 55%, that's a very big achievement. If you have a 90% approval rate, and it's not existential war, you are living in a totalitarian dictatorship.
Longevity is one of the subjects you touched on in your books extensively. In your opinion, has the progress stalled, or have you stayed optimistic on the outlook of radically prolonging human life? Have your it's the question about the time horizons, because we both stay optimistic about the longevity technology, but
I'm not sure I was ever optimistic about it in the sense I think it's coming. I'm not necessarily convinced it's a good thing, because my main fear is that it could be a privilege of a very few people and it will create immense divisions in society. So yes, I think that we will have, not in the next 5 or 10 years, but in the next 50 or 100 years, we will have technologies to radically extend human life. And this is something that I'm quite pessimistic about, because there is a big danger it will be expensive and available only to a small portion of humanity, and it will create a very sharp, a bigger divide in human society than ever before. You know, in any previous human society, at least one thing was always equal, and this is death. The emperors, the sultans, the kings, at least they also died. To live in a society when most people or the poor people continue to grow old and die, but a small elite stays young and lives indefinitely, this is a terrible scenario for humankind for a lot of reasons, politically, ethically, socially.
Okay. I beg to differ, but it's a longer debate.
Oh, okay.
I think it will be a commodity technology at one point, so we all will be blessed with the longevity.
That's a different story.
I don't know if I will be live long enough to benefit from it, but still I think, like every technology, the cost will go to almost zero.
The question is how long it will take. Usually with technologies, the problem is not the end point, it's the transition period. The transition period is a period of upheavals. And the more radical the technology, the greater the upheaval of the transition period. So that's the big danger.
Do you still hold strong conviction that dataism is the answer to human challenges? Do you subscribe to David Brooks, who invented the term, belief that growing body of evidence, science research, and big data will reduce population's cognitive biases? Given the last few years and the growing opposition to experts, science research, vaccinations and such,
Again, I'm not. I was never optimistic about it because I'm not convinced it's a good thing. Looking at the span of human history, one thing is very, very clear: information isn't truth. Growth in information is not growth in truth. Fake news are information, conspiracy theories are information, lies is information, propaganda is information. Very efficient information systems can also be very efficient repressive systems. It's not, yes, you can use a sophisticated information system, information network, to discover the truth. But you can also use it to impose a lie. And we saw it many, many times in history that very efficient information systems, they are just very good at imposing lies. So yes, I think we will see a huge increase in the power of information technology and in the speed and efficiency of the flow of information, but we should be extremely careful about it.
But not the reduction of cognitive biases.
It depends what we do with it. You can use the new information technology to reduce cognitive bias. For instance, you can use it to be more aware of your own biases, which is one of the most difficult things for humans, is to be aware of my own bias, to know myself. And now we have technologies that can tell us much more accurately than ever before what our biases are. Even people who think that they are not racist, even people who think that they are not homophobic, we now have technological tests that you can really see the level of your racism or the level of your misogyny or whatever. But that's a choice of what you do with these technologies.
Coming back to longevity, how do you treat your body to prolong life? Do you put any effort in prolonging the length and the quality of life? Do you refrain from red meat, from alcohol?
I do all kinds of things, but not in order to prolong my life. The main reasons are first of all ethical. I refrain from eating meat, not because I think it will prolong my life, but because it prolongs the life of the chickens and the cows, whatever. And I refrain from drinking alcohol or using other drugs because I work very hard to kind of clarify my mind. And these substances work mostly by kind of obscuring the mind, of clouding the mind. So it's like doing a step forward, a step back. So I'm not sure if not drinking alcohol will prolong my life, but I think it will make it a better life.
Okay. We say that the Western countries are hedonistic, consumerist societies, that we invented hundreds of ways to enjoy our lives. But still, there is a new plague: depression, apathy, gloom, anhedonia. Is it a plague? Is it a contagion? What's the transmission mechanism? Me as a parent, I want to know what's your take on it. What's the transmission mechanism? What are the roots of the growing problem of mental challenges and depression?
I'm not sure if Western modern society is more depressed than previous societies, but certainly didn't find the kind of secret of happiness. Humans are very good in acquiring more power through scientific research, technological invention, organizational reforms. They are very good in acquiring power.
So we are over-diagnosed, or were we under-diagnosed?
Previously, we were under-diagnosed.
And now over-diagnosed?
I'm not sure if over. I mean, there are serious problems, but it's not like life in the Middle Ages, everybody was dancing from joy all the time, and then modernity came and everybody became kind of depressed. It wasn't fun to live in the Middle Ages. There were fun moments, of course, but generally speaking, it wasn't like a fun period.
Or maybe like thought leader Jordan Peterson advises the young people should grow balls and to toughen up.
Mm-hmm. You know, the Vikings were very tough. I'm not sure they were very happy people.
Yeah, exactly.
You can say a lot of things about them, though again, the impression from reading the sagas and from the archaeological evidence, I wouldn't bet that Vikings 1,000 years ago were happier than Swedes and Danes are today.
Do you oppose or are pro-eugenics at conception or in womb? What's your take on it?
Can you define? People use the term in very.
I mean, probably
test case.
For example, changing the gene makeup to make people more intelligent, brighter.
At present, I'm very much against it because I think we don't understand humans well enough to start messing up. You don't know. Most human. There are exceptions, but most human qualities, they are determined not by a single gene, but by a combination of many genes. each gene also responsible for other things. So you don't know. Maybe you tweak the gene for intelligence, and it also causes people to be less compassionate. Maybe you tweak the gene for depression, and it also makes people less spiritual. So until we have a better understanding of humanity, I would say that the agenda of research should not be to kind of re-engineer humans. It should be to understand them and to help them make the most of what they have. To take like a thing that you go to the supermarket to buy new stuff. First of all, look in your refrigerator. Maybe you don't need new stuff. Maybe what's in there is enough. So it's the same with the human. Before we rush to have 4 hands or to enlarge the brain or whatever, we don't really know what we have. Let's first of all find out what our real potential is and how to maximize it. And then if we discover that we lack something essential, okay, let's talk about upgrades.
Would you prohibit it?
At present, again, with certain exceptions, like with severe diseases that we really understand the genetic mechanisms behind, then yes.
So would you refuse to parents that their children are bright like the people that are gathered here? It's a hard question.
Would I refuse?
Would you refuse to parents that opportunity?
No, I don't think that we can kind of engineer bright people simply by changing the genetic code. It's, with the same genetic code, somebody can grow up to be a saint or a monster. So and again, the connection between the genetic code and your characteristic at age 20 and 40 is so complicated. So yes, I do want, of course, to have a bright and compassionate new generation. I'm just not sure that tweaking with DNA is the best way to get there.
You emphasize this issue. How can we believe experts? We are taught about the dangers of do your own research, and that we should defend the institutions, defend the experts, but still, time to time, we discover that the experts and the institutions lie to us, manipulate. Yes. Like this week, JP Morgan, one of the most renowned and respected banks that wanted to retract that they called China uninvestable because they were afraid they will lose the business in China. And how can we trust the institutions if the institution cheat on us?
First of all, it should be clear you can't research everything yourself. Yeah. Even as a historian, most of what I know about history, I can't just go myself and do every archaeological excavation in the world. Impossible. So this is ridiculous to tell people, go and research, do your own research on everything. We have to trust institutions. The question then is, which institutions to trust? Not all of them are equally trustworthy. So the best yardstick that I know of is self-correction mechanisms. A good institution is an institution that, first of all, is aware that it itself can make mistakes and has a strong self-correcting mechanism. And when a mistake is discovered, it acknowledges it, and sometimes even celebrates it. Science, in general, is such an institution. You can't win Nobel Prize by just repeating what people before you said. You must discover something that somebody said wrong or didn't know in order to win Nobel Prize. So science is like the extreme case of an institution built around a self-correcting mechanism. Then you have at the opposite extreme, for instance, religious institutions that, I don't know, like the Pope is supposed to be infallible, can never make any mistakes. That's the opposite. And the Catholic Church, it apologized sometimes for mistakes and crimes in the past, but never as an institution. It usually says that, no, the church can never make a mistake, but individual priests, individual bishops, yes, they can make mistakes. This I find problematic. An institution should be able to humbly and honestly acknowledge that as an institution, we did something wrong. You know, I mean, things like the Crusades, like the Inquisition, they were not the initiative of some wayward priest. So honestly, the church said, yes, we made a mistake. And in the same way that, you know, in the Department of Biology in a university, most biologists would acknowledge that the discipline of biology was tainted by very severe racism for a very long period. From the 19th century, much of the 20th century, the discipline of biology was racist and propagated racist view. This was not the fault of a particular professor who was biased. As an institution, they made an institutional mistake. And one of the reasons that I trust scientific institutions is because, yes, they make mistakes, but when they do, they have the, not always, but at least sometimes, the humility and the honesty to take responsibility as an institution. And it's the same, you know, with governments. There was this meeting between the foreign ministers of China and the US in Alaska a couple of 2 years ago. And the Chinese minister, a long list of all the crimes that the US did in its history. And the US foreign minister said, yes, we did crimes, but unlike you, we acknowledge them. We can come and say, yes, it was a mistake, not a huge crime. Slavery is a huge crime. This war here and this invasion there, it was a huge crime. Wait until you get the Chinese to recognize something similar. You'll have to wait a long time.
Yeah, but continuing. Public theory. Do you know what it is? The theory about the origins of COVID, of coronavirus.
Oh, I heard many theories about
that. But it starts with the humbling experience for myself. I switched the opinion a few times. Mm-hmm. First, I thought that this is one of the far-right conspiracy theories, and I even ridiculed people myself. No, it's. But then I've seen the public theory that the origins of coronavirus are man-made, not planted, but it was a leak from the lab in Wuhan. Mm-hmm. Then we've heard that it was from the animal, from the bats or like this. And then I've seen the strong evidence pro it, so pro the public theory, and I felt humbled because how regular people should navigate this jungle of conflicting data, information. Mm-hmm. We talk about the misinformation, disinformation, and I felt myself I'm quite apt at it, yeah. And then still I felt the victim. Mm-hmm. And still to these days, I don't know what's the truth.
Yeah, again,
how to raise our skills at discerning the truth from the...
First of all, to realize that about many things we don't know. As individuals, we just don't know. And again, I would trust institutions because it's yes, they make mistakes, but it's the best thing we have. In this case, scientific institutions. I'm not an expert on epidemiology. I don't understand viruses. I can't tell the difference between a virus which is man-made and a virus which is evolved by natural selection.
Still, the truth has strong implication for the future.
It has immense implication, but there are many things we don't know. So if I'm not sure, then just acknowledge that.
So the advice would be proceed with caution when the new information comes in?
Don't rush to adopt a kind of a very strong view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, I mean, first of all, again, in such a complicated issue, we don't have a choice but to follow the experts. Yes, the expert can manipulate us, but what's the alternative? I mean, viruses are such a complicated thing. A virus is not even an animal. It's just a biological code. It doesn't eat. It doesn't reproduce by itself. It's not like a tiny ant or a tiny tiger. It's something completely alien. It has the ability, this code, to infiltrate our cells hijack the mechanisms of the cells and make the cell produce more copies of this code, which then spread to other cells and goes viral. Now, this is such a difficult thing for humans to understand because we never encountered these things directly in evolution. Our minds evolved to understand things like tigers, like mice, like ants, which we can actually see, which function in a familiar way because they are animals like us. So I don't really understand virology, just as I don't understand quantum mechanics. You know, how do I know, I don't know, like the Iranian nuclear program? I don't understand nuclear physics, so I trust what the nuclear physicists are telling me about nuclear weapons. If there is a worldwide conspiracy of nuclear physicists to lie to all of us about nuclear weapons, then what can we do? But I don't see the kind, you know, what's the incentive behind it? Very often with conspiracy theories, the question to ask is what is the incentive? You know, to take something from a very different area. Like lots of people believe, you know, that the ancient pyramids were built by aliens and there is some secret technology hidden there. And the Egyptologists, the experts on ancient Egypt, they have a conspiracy to hide it from the public. And I never understand what could be their motivation. I mean, I know these people. Some of my best friends are Egyptologists. And, you know, these people are so kind of frustrated because almost nobody goes to study Egyptology at university. They don't get any budgets because people think it's not important. Now, imagine what would happen if it turns out that the pyramids were built by aliens and there is some very powerful weapon hidden inside. Immediately, you will have thousands of students coming to Egyptology, and you have billions of dollars from the government to Egyptology. So they have every incentive in the world to convince the public that, yes, the pyramids were built by aliens, give us money now. And they don't do it. They honestly say, nah, there are lots of slaves who hold bricks for years and build the pyramids. So I trust them.
Coming back to Netflix, most of us have seen Don't Look Up, the movie.
I saw it also.
Yeah. Imagine this scenario. The asteroid is coming for Earth. It seems we are doomed. And until someone invents the solution to the problem, whom do you believe? The president? Who will save us? President, NASA, or Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos?
I would go with the president.
Put your money on
the president. I mean, again, it's because it's not a job of private entrepreneurs to make these huge decisions. They were not elected by anybody. They don't represent anybody. Okay, they are very smart people. They made a lot of money. But who says that the interest of the public is really what guides them? Of course, also is the president who says, but a president at least was elected by a large part of the public. So there is a greater chance that the president would represent the interest of the public than a billionaire. And again, whatever the crisis is, asteroid, climate change, the facts is the responsibility of the scientists to provide them.
Professor.
But the decision, what to do, is not just about the facts. It's also about weighing different interests. And this is the job of politicians, not the job of scientists.
Yeah. So would you agree, Professor Harari, that this was the harmful movie? Because it showed the distrust in governments. That was my view. Because most people were enchanted with the idea that these honest people that fight the government.
Even though if you look at the movie carefully, the first plan to destroy the asteroid, it was aborted in the last minute because of the intervention of this private entrepreneur, billionaire. So again, it was never clarified whether the plan would work or not. But the impression is that the first plan, which was cobbled together by the government and NASA, it would actually have saved humanity. And then it was the intervention of a private entrepreneur, billionaire, that ruined everything. So you can read it as a call trust the government and don't allow private businesses to have too much influence on the government.
Last question on my side, and we will ask the audience. Who is the most important philosopher and thought leader from Europe you read? Contemporary or not, but rather contemporary.
I'm not a good judge of these things. I can tell you who influences me.
Yeah, exactly.
So one very big influence on me from a European thinker is Frans de Waal, who is not, a philosopher per se. He is a primatologist. He studies apes and other animals, mainly apes. But at least on my thought, he had enormous influence. And I think that, the borderline between scientist and philosopher, it can be quite hazy.
Yeah. Any female influences?
Let me think.
Susan Sontag, Margaret Atwood.
Elaine Scarry had a very big influence on my thinking when I was in university, and then many things that I write and say today, I read it in her book, like The Body in Pain, had a very, very deep influence on me. Lately, it's Shoshana Zuboff, with her writing on surveillance capitalism and artificial intelligence and all that. She had a big influence on me.
Okay. Now to the questions from the audience. The first question is from Jasmina Kazenko or Jaśmina Kasenko.
Oh.
Would you like me to read it, or you will do it yourself, please? From Heinrich Heine Universität Düsseldorf.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Professor, organizers, fellow guests. I'm Jasmina Kasenko. I'm an academic teacher and a researcher and co-founder of an educational development foundation recently. My question is about the future of leadership, because our generation is, well, let's not kid ourselves, facing a lot of troubles. A lot of them you mentioned in your books, a lot of them were mentioned already. My question is, what kind of challenges do you envision for the emergent leaders in the fields of political and economic leadership, and how should we prepare for them? Thank you very much.
So we definitely need good leaders, especially in politics. And two problems that I now see, which were not always there, is that people have a very low opinion of politicians. You have this kind of widespread feeling, oh, they are all liars and they are all corrupt and they are all crooked. And this is very, very dangerous. People then expect leadership from other places, from entrepreneurs, from scientists, and they can't do that. As a scientist, as a thinker, I know I can't replace politicians. It's a very bad idea to try and replace politicians by scientists. Scientists are not good at politics. So this is a job to be a politician. You need special skills for that. And it's wrong to think that all politicians are corrupt or they all lie or whatever. This is what the bad politicians want you to think, because this kind of excuses them. If I lie as a politician, I say, everybody lies. No, not everybody lies. You lie. So we need to have a kind of better, to have a more positive attitude. It's a very, very hard profession. It becomes harder. And the second reason it becomes harder is what we just discussed earlier, that in today's world, politicians, at least in democratic countries, they are denied a private life. And this is extremely dangerous. First of all, because then very few good people want to be politicians. Because part of the price you have to pay is that you don't have a private life. Who wants that? Only some very specific characters want that, and that's dangerous. And secondly, you need to relax sometime. It's becoming also for politicians harder and harder to relax, because they are constantly connected. There is the news cycle is 24 hours, and it's, again, the mind of the politician creates things that then changes the lives of millions. And they need some peace of mind. It's very dangerous for a society when its political leaders don't get any chance to kind of decompress and kind of just sit there and do nothing and just relax a bit. So I would encourage people, if they have the quality, to go into politics, and I would encourage society to give them a bit of a break.
Hugo Dudka, University of Warsaw. Hugo? Come to the stage, please.
Hi, how are you? So my name is Hugo Dudka, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of a startup that creates products which do not require users to trust them. Our code is public, and users can verify that the code that they see is the code that handles their data. And my question is related to that. Our society, our financial and legal systems are based upon trust. Trust to the judges, trust to the banks, even trust to facilities which store our legal documents so they do not alter, lose, or destroy them. And I'm curious if you think that introducing and building such trustless solutions is important or not, and if you see any dangers in introducing such solutions.
Oh, it's a good question. Let me think about it for a minute.
Basically, is the question about the blockchain, I think.
Not so, no. Just let me clarify, not blockchain. Blockchain is just a technology that currently is enabling that.
Yes.
It's problems, and it's hot, but I'm not asking about blockchain per se.
Okay. So, in general, I would say that trust is the most important commodity in any society, because this is what society is built on. Money, in essence, is trust. And not just money, but again, any institution, any large-scale system is built on trust. Throughout history, people always dreamt about a technology. I mean, the problem with trust is that many people are not trustworthy. That people make mistakes, people are corrupt, people are fallible. So throughout history, not just today, humans always dreamt about kind of pushing humans aside and finding a perfect technology that we can trust instead of the humans. Until today, it never worked. Until today, every time humans tried to do it, in the end, they had to create a human institution to manage the infallible technology. So to give a historical example, think about holy books, like the Bible. Previously, religions were based on trusting in humans. You had the priests, you had the prophets, and they told you what God wanted. But then people said, wait a minute, how do we know that the prophet is telling the truth? How do we know that the priest is telling the truth? They are humans. Maybe they are lying to us. Maybe they made a mistake. So they came up with the original blockchain. The original blockchain is the Bible. It's based on the same principle. You reach a consensus among many users about a certain block of code, and then you seal it, and you make many copies of it. And then this means that you cannot falsify it. If I change something in my Bible, you take out your Bible, no. You see, it's written like this. And people thought, that's it. We got rid of these fallible humans. We now have the word of God, and nobody can change it, and we have trust. But very, very quickly, they discovered it doesn't work like that, because different people read the same words and interpreted them in a completely different way. So Jesus says, love your enemies, and the church says, Inquisition, we should burn, this is what he means, we should burn heretics, we should go on crusades. And other people said, no. And it turned out that you need a human institution to interpret the infallible technology of the Holy Book. And I don't know how it will be in the future, but at least in 2022, every technology still needs a human institution to regulate it. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't develop new technology. It's good. I mean, many technologies are extremely helpful to humanity, but we shouldn't think that there is this perfect technology that if we just invent it, that's it, everything is solved. I mean, I know that you didn't refer specifically to blockchain, but again, it's probably on many people's mind, blockchain. So, one problem with blockchain is that if 51% of users, for instance, are controlled by a government, And we have examples like in China, when there are blockchain networks controlled by a government, then it really becomes an extreme, it's the extreme opposite. You can't trust anything in that network. Because, you know, when the communists in previous generations, they wanted to kind of change the past, they had to go to the archives and delete pictures from the archives and whatever. Now, if all the archives are on blockchain, and they control 51% or 60% of the users, it becomes so easy to change the past. So I'm not against blockchain or any future technology. I'm just saying that at present, we'll always still need human institutions to regulate whatever technology it is.
Jadwiga Pisarska. I'm fearing I stole your question, but still, I would like you. I would like you to ask this question once more.
Yes, Professor Harari, my name is Jadwiga Pisarska. I'm a graduate student at University of Warsaw. As it was said, I would love to elaborate more on one of the questions here. As I'm 26, I'm approaching the upper limit, allowing me to be here today with you. It's becoming a more and more immediate and personal question for me. Having children, not having children. Will be there any point of time, any hint, any situation that should indicate me that it is safe, just, wise to have children, and that the planet will be a friendly and nice place to live beyond 2050? Or should I just protect my children from suffering, from fighting for water, by not bringing them to this planet? Please tell me.
Okay.
This time.
Well, I don't want the responsibility to make any such decision.
No, it's not an offer. Like.
So I would say two things.
Yeah, we know that kids' discussion are very emotional, and yes, they are very immediate.
So first of all, it was always like this. In any point in history, people who have kids, they don't know what kind of world they are bringing them into. Could always be terrible wars, epidemics, famines. So this was always a question for any prospective parents. The other point is just what I said earlier, that I would say that the key is whether people decide to have kids for their own interests. Like, I know, there are extreme cases that people have, I don't know, a marital crisis with their spouse, and they think to solve the crisis by having kids. So we have something together. That's a bad idea. I mean, if you have kids, do it for the kids, not for you, not for your religion, your nation, not to take your baggage and put it on the kids. And then, again, it becomes a very, I think, personal and deep spiritual question of your perspective on life, and how is life created, and where is it coming from. And this is something that I think that people should really look deep into themselves and not expect the answers from any guru or any outside authority on that.
So it looks like we are left with very big questions here, but thank you very much.
But I would say one more thing about it. Again, I wouldn't, if you reach the conclusion with yourself that you want it and you want it for the right reasons for the kids and not for you or not for somebody else, then the worries about what will happen in the world outside. It's climate change. There is, again, you don't know what the future is going to be like. And it was always like this. There wasn't a single moment in human history that humans could look forward for the next 50 years or 100 years and say, yes, it's going to be a perfect world. I'm completely certain that if I have kids, they will have a perfect world to live in.
Tomasz Bachos from the University of Oxford.
No, thank you for the talk. Thank you for very inspirational themes mentioned, thoughts. I'm an Oxford alumnus like you, as I presume. And my question is, judging on the current state of Europe and its disintegrity, which we see despite the conflict in Ukraine and some kind of unification, what trends do you see for Europe in the future? Will it come back to some common narrative like it used to be with Christianity? Will it be every nation for itself? Or will it be like United States, both politically and ethnically? What do you think will happen? Thank you.
Well, I often get these questions about the predictions for the future. I'm not very good at it. I can kind of map different scenarios, but it's impossible to predict which of them will actually come true because it depends on the decisions people take. If you ask me this question, let's say 4 months ago, then I would be more pessimistic than I am today. I think that the war in Ukraine has reminded people in Europe how important is European unity. That so much is at stake, first of all for themselves, but also for the entire world. That Europe stands together and stands united, again, not just to protect itself, but also to protect its common values. And yes, Europeans kind of tend to forget that they have common values until you see a bully like Putin and how he behaves, and then you remember, actually, despite all our disagreements and arguments and then whatever, actually we do have a lot of common values. So I really hope that maybe one good thing that could come out of this terrible war is greater European unity. And I also refer to it in answer to one of your questions, that the key to that would be to end the culture war within Europe. That to realize that liberals and conservatives and right wings and left wings, yes, they have their disagreements, but overall they agree on so much. Much of the culture war is fueled by politicians who take certain inflammatory issues and really weaponize them in order to gain political votes. And you can end that today. Many of the kind of burning issues, if you approach them in a spirit of kind of open-mindedness and compassion, you would be surprised that it's not so difficult to reach a consensus with the opposite side. But if you want to weaponize them in order to kind of electrify your base and win the elections, then this is the road to greater and greater division. I mean, as a historian, I'm often struck by how, again and again in history, people find themselves getting into terrible conflicts over things that look to them important at the moment, and then after a few generations, people look back and they just can't understand how was it possible to fight over something like that. Again, taking an example from religious history, you go back to Europe in the 16th, 17th century, and Europeans are killing each other by the millions over the conflict between Protestants and Catholics. And this conflict didn't end when they finally found the answer, who is right about the Trinity, or who is right about transubstantiation and communion and all that. Finally, people just stopped caring about it. I mean, you look at a place like Germany that it tore itself apart in the 30 Years' War, and about a third of the population of Germany died in the 30 Years' War. And today, I mean, is Schulz or is Angela Merkel either Catholic, either Protestant? It's just not so important anymore. And you look back and you just don't understand, did they really have to kill each other by the million over that? So it's easy to see it when you look at previous eras. I hope we can get some kind of similar perspective on what's happening in the present. This is, of course, much more difficult.
Katarzyna Kroszka, please come to the stage from Bolesław Prus High School in Warsaw.
Yes.
High school.
Thank you. I'm Kasia Kroszka from high school, and I'm interested in media. So my question is, as a book writer, speaker, and press interviewee, both in written and video form, what is, in your opinion, currently the most important and efficient way of sharing knowledge? Thank you.
Actually, I think that's a question for my husband, not for me. I know how to write books and give interviews, but kind of the big decisions about who to sign a contract with and which kind of social account to have and things like that, he's making these decisions. He's kind of the media genius in the family. So, I'm very traditional. I believe in books. This is what I know how to write. But the thing is, it's developing at such a fast pace that what was true 3 years ago is no longer the case today, and who knows what will be the situation in 3 or 4 years. So I guess the most important thing is flexibility. That it's not like you find an answer and that's it. You read kind of the map right now, and this is the way to spread knowledge most effectively, and maybe in 3 years, in 5 years, it will be different. So how to keep a flexible approach, that's the biggest problem.
Michał Wyremkowski from the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you for an amazing talk, Professor Harari. I will have a question on homo deus, and depends how you view it, but also philosophy of history. So controversial individuals in the likes of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are pretty much in the avant-garde of global change, sponsoring initiatives like Neuralink or space exploration. And they really seem to fit the description of the great men of history who, for the good or bad, drive us or push us forward into the unknown. So do you think that it is like these men actually drive history, or that there are just some trends underpinning forces of history, like class warfare and like classical Marxism, that actually push us forward? And should we do anything to constrain these individuals?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, if Elon Musk lived in a hunter-gatherer tribe 20,000 years ago, so obviously he couldn't do these things. So he's what enables him to do what he does is the action of millions of people over thousands of years who created certain conditions. But then once the conditions are there, individuals have agency. And powerful individuals have a lot of agency. If you go back to the war in Ukraine, then in the end, it was Putin's decision. And this is an extreme case of how much power and influence a single individual can have on history. This war can now lead to generations of hatred between Ukrainians and Russians. Even if it ends, it will leave such a devastating legacy behind. And it all started with the decision of one person. Nobody forced him to start this war. But still you can say, but how did he reach a situation when he had so much power? This was not his decision. This was processes in Russian society, in Russian politics, over several decades that led to the point when Putin had so much power. So you have this mixture. And it's the same with Elon Musk, and it's the same with every big leader, that they don't create the conditions that give them power, but when the power is in their hands, then they can have a huge influence on the direction of history.
Maria Schuster from Sciences Po in Paris.
Thank you so much. Hello, I'm Maria Schuster from Sciences Po in Paris. And Professor, I was wondering about the role of China in the world. China is, of course, a totalitarian country that constantly does not exactly respect all the values that we cherish in the West, like democracy and human rights. But simultaneously, we do need China in order to combat climate crisis.
Yes.
So do you think, Professor, that potentially we can accept Chinese behavior on the front of human rights and democracy in order for cooperation in combating climate change? Thank you.
Well, that's a very important question. I think we should differentiate to some extent, between how governments and countries behave internally and externally. There are simply realistic limits to how much you can intervene, or you should intervene, in the internal affairs of another country, no matter how bad you think they are. It's simply an impossibility. The question is how these countries behave on the international arena. And here, for example, we see so far, I don't know what will happen tomorrow or next year, but so far there is a big difference between China and Russia, for example. That Russia has been waging one external war after the other, invading one country after the other, whereas China, since 1979, has not engaged in any foreign adventure directly, not by military force. As long as China respects the basic international norms, I think there should be room for cooperating with it on issues like climate change, especially because without Chinese cooperation, we don't get very far. And again, I don't know what will happen, but for humankind to have a positive future, we need cooperation between China and the West. There could be scenarios when this cooperation just becomes impossible, and that's the reality. And this will be very bad news, and we'll have to handle it somehow. But until we reach that point, we should keep the hope that some kind of cooperation, at least on common problems like climate change or like disruptive technologies, is possible.
And thank you so much.
Michał Stankiewicz, University of Oxford.
Thank you, Professor. I think that maybe despite Mr. Brański's promise, the atmosphere is still quite Ukraine-heavy, and very rightfully so. But maybe not to lose focus from other existential threats to humanity, I would ask you, what is maybe some particular disruptive technology that you find both exciting and you're worried about that emerged in recent years?
So the biggest immediate threat, I think, comes from the combination of artificial intelligence with surveillance technology. Because this is a potential recipe for the worst totalitarian regimes in human history. Until today, totalitarianism was limited by the lack of the necessary technology. If you think about Poland during the communist dictatorship, or you think about the Soviet Union, the regime couldn't really completely eliminate private life. It couldn't follow every single citizen 24 hours a day and know what each person is doing and saying, because of limitations, practical limitations. If you have 200 million people in the Soviet Union, and you need a KGB agent to follow each one of them, so you need 200 million agents, but then of course, even a KGB agent needs to rest sometime, so you need 2 shifts, so you need 400 million KGB agents, and then somebody needs to follow the KGB agents because they can also be a threat to the regime. So you need 800 million agents to follow the 400. It's impossible. And even if you get people just spy on each other, which was a common practice also, still, at the end of the day, let's say that I spy on my husband and my husband spies on me, and at the end of the day, we are both informers of the Stasi or of the KGB, and at the end of the day, we write a report, he did this, he said that, and we send it to Moscow. And then in Moscow, they get 200 million papers every day that somebody needs to read and analyze. And that's impossible. Who can do that? So it was physically, technically impossible to create a total surveillance regime. Now it's becoming feasible. You don't need human agents to follow people. You have digital agents. And we even pay for them with our own money and loyally take them with us everywhere we go. And they follow us. And it takes much faster for them to send the report. And it's not like you get a mountain of paper in some headquarters that some poor human analyst now needs to go over. You have digital algorithms that can analyze this information and find patterns. We are not there yet. There are still limitations to the ability of the system, but we are close to the point when it will become technically possible to follow everybody all the time. The dream of every totalitarian regime in history. Now, it doesn't have to be like that. We can prevent it from happening by making the right regulations, taking the right precautions. Surveillance can be good. Like if I have medical surveillance, this can be the basis for the best healthcare system in history. which warns me about diseases and problems before they become worse. So it can develop in a positive direction, but we need to be careful. I would give like 3 basic guidelines how to direct it in a good way. First of all, if you collect information on me, this information should be used to help me and not manipulate me. This should be obvious. We already have it in many fields, like again in healthcare. I give a lot of very private information about me to my personal physician. She doesn't then use it to manipulate me or to sell it to a third party to manipulate me. She has a fiduciary duty towards me to use the information only for my benefit, only to help me. So we should have it as a general rule. The second principle is that you should never allow all the information to be concentrated in one place. Whether it's a corporation, whether it's a government agency, this is the high road to dictatorship. You need to keep the information separate between different organizations, different silos. And thirdly, whenever you increase top-down surveillance, you must simultaneously increase bottom-up surveillance. So, okay, the government or a big corporation knows more about me. Simultaneously, I should be able to know more about them. Whether they pay their taxes, whether there is government corruption. So if surveillance increases generally, but it increases both ways, the government knows more about the citizens, but the citizens also know more about the government, then there is balance, and then we are not on the road to a totalitarian regime.
We squeezed all the questions from the audience I had in my notebook. So we have a time for the one last question. And you have a very strong opinion on the issue that polarized Poland, polarizes to this day. If I understand correctly, your opinion is that the anti-immigration is a legitimate political stance, as legitimate as being pro-immigrant.
Yes.
Please explain yourself.
Again, we need to differentiate between immigrants and, war refugees. If you live in a country and the regime tries to kill you, and your only way out is to escape to the neighboring country, that neighboring country has a moral responsibility to accept you. But immigration is a different matter. People don't just have a universal right to immigrate anywhere they want at any moment. It's a question of the host country to what extent it wants to receive these people and under what conditions. Now, and this is an ethical question for each person with himself. So, there are Christian teachings about this. There are Islamic teachings about this. There are secular teachings about this. People have different views. Ultimately, it shouldn't be seen as a clash between good and evil.
Exactly.
It should be a democratic discussion. I hope that people will be more tolerant and more accepting. At the same time, understanding that you cannot accept a country to kind of just open its gates completely. Anybody who wants to come from anywhere, under what condition would accept everyone? This is not workable. But still, I would like to see countries that have more compassionate policies. But ultimately, if the population doesn't want it, then if it's a democracy, you can't force them. Again, the only place where I would say that no, there is a kind of moral obligation to open the door wide is when these are refugees escaping death.
Which is a hazy distinction.
Like all this,
what we as a country experienced a few months ago when the wave of refugees from Afghanistan and some eastern countries tried to enter Poland through Belarus, and we are very conflicted. I think every Polish person is very conflicted about how to behave towards these people.
Yeah. So again, I have my own opinions, and again, I lean towards being more tolerant, more accepting. But I think it's very important not to turn it into a kind of good versus evil situation. This is what the democratic process was designed to do. It was designed to allow people to have different opinions. You have political rivals, but don't see them as their enemies. And it's the responsibility of both sides not to kind of, again, weaponize this issue and depict the other side as engaged in some kind of satanic conspiracy to destroy the nation or whatever. And ultimately, what most people, most citizens vote for, this is how it happens in a democratic country.
So the advice is don't weaponize immigration issue.
Yes, again, for both sides, don't weaponize it, don't kind of inflame it in order to get more votes or whatever. And yes, make your arguments, make your ethical arguments. It's a difficult issue. Try to stay open to the arguments of the other side, but start from an understanding that both positions are legitimate. Those that want to put a certain limit on immigration, it doesn't immediately turn them into Nazis and fascists. And those that want to accept more immigrants, it doesn't immediately turn them into traitors and enemies of the people. Now, two legitimate positions. It's a very difficult choice. It's not easy. There are a lot of issues involved. What is the carrying capacity of the country? What are the positions of the immigrants? To what extent the immigrants are willing to accept the norms, the values, the culture of the host country? This is also an important issue. So it's a complicated debate, and it should remain a complicated debate. It shouldn't be oversimplified by turning it into this kind of forces of light versus forces of darkness situation.
Thank you, Professor Harari. I feel enlightened, and you are a magician because you always find the common ground between the opposing views.
Not always.
But you seem to always put lots of effort into finding the common ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Michał Brański, profesor Harari. Podziękujmy im, pokażmy im, jak bardzo dziękujemy za to, że znaleźli dla nas czas. Serdeczne podziękowania. Reżyser, proszę Państwa, w swoim filmie powiedział: nie patrz w górę. No, my musimy niestety spoglądać na zegarki. Bardzo serdecznie Państwu dziękuję. Dziękuję także za to, że wzięliście czynny udział. Patrzę w stronę pierwszych rzędów, choć nie tylko, w tym dzisiejszym spotkaniu. To było piękne spotkanie także dzięki Waszym fantastycznym pytaniom. Bardzo dziękuję za potężne zainteresowanie, za to, że dzisiaj wszyscy wzięliśmy udział w tej, myślę, że co do mojego określenia możemy się zgodzić. Mam nadzieję, że tak jest w istocie, w tej intelektualnej uczcie. Bardzo dziękuję partnerowi strategicznemu Impact, najbardziej prestiżowemu wydarzeniu gospodarczo-technologicznemu w Europie Środkowo-Wschodniej. Gościem specjalnym w tym roku Impact odbywa się w Poznaniu. Był profesor Harari. Dziękuję partnerowi medialnemu Wirtualnej Polsce, gospodarzowi hotalowi Crowne Plaza i pozostałym partnerom, firmie, która pięknie nam to wszystko wyprodukowała, firmie The Way. 60 minut, coś takiego, co się nazywa networking session teraz przed nami, a więc wy tam możecie się jeszcze spotkać, wymienić refleksjami, opiniami, bo jestem przekonany, że tych opinii, refleksji, przemyśleń, komentarzy nie brakuje. Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję. Patrycjusz Wyżga, kłaniam się Państwu. Do zobaczenia. Miłego wieczoru.